Good morning, and welcome to the Lead Center for the Performing Arts, and welcome to Table Inspirations 2017, Entertaining Southern Style. We're so grateful that you're here this morning, and just want to let you know a little bit about the Friends of Lead. The Friends of Lead is a fundraising organization that raises additional funding for the Lead Center. Ticket sales only provide about 40% of the funding to operate the Lead Center, and so it's necessary to have extra funding. Through events like Table Inspirations and the Gala, which are held on alternating years, we raised $40,000 to $60,000. But our goal is to be able to donate in excess of $240,000 each year to the Lead Center. So our main fundraiser is membership. And that's where you come in. If you're already a member of the Friends of Lead, we thank you so much. If you're not, we would like you to think about becoming a member. You can talk to anyone who has a Friends of Lead name tag on, or you can talk to Donna Seafeld in the administrative offices. And I think I forgot to tell you who I am. I was really nervous about talking. So I'm Doreen Litchie, and I'm the president of the Friends of Lead Board of Directors for 2016-2017. So in case you're wondering who this person is. I'm now going to introduce to you the event chairs for Table Inspirations. Lynette Krieger is from Hastings, Nebraska. And Lynette, I chose Lynette as a chair because she's a really detail-oriented person, and that's been a valuable trait on this team of event chairs. Julie Jareski is from Fullerton, Nebraska. She owns a floral decor and gift shop there, and so she's our creative element to the team. And Karen Emerson she's the anchor, she's the driving force, she's the organizer. She made sure that everybody got things done. So Karen is also a very valuable part of the team, and she's from Beatrice, Nebraska. And she will now be introducing to you the speaker for this morning.
Thank you. And what she meant was I'm the bossy one, right? Everybody knows that. Okay, I am Karen Emerson. Welcome, and we're so glad you're here today. It's my pleasure to welcome Ty Leslie to the stage. But before I do that, I want to make a couple housekeeping announcements. If you don't have one of these with the label on the back with your number and your table assignment, you'll have to go get it at the front door if you missed that on the way in. Your tables are all assigned, and so there's no need to race to the stage after Ty finishes. You have an assigned seat, and we will all be exiting this way to your right through those doors and walking around to the stage. And when Ty finishes, we'll have the big reveal, which those of you who've done this many times, it's a high point, so it's going to be better than ever. Okay. Ty Leslie lives in Charleston, South Carolina, where he's a freelance designer designing signature weddings and events in historic Charleston and the surrounding area, including Kiowa Island, which many of you I know have been to. One of our co-chairs, Julie Jareski, first heard Ty speak at a design conference last year, and she knew we had to bring him to this event. You can read all about him in the program, but I just wanted to give you a couple things you wouldn't know about Ty. First of all, 45 minutes is not nearly long enough, and I hope some of you have seen him on TV yesterday to hear more from him. But one thing, when we went to Charleston to visit with him, we asked him what he knew about Nebraska. And of course, what's the first thing most people would say when you ask them, what do they know about Nebraska? The Cornhuskers. Ty said, what? He said, all I know about are the Sandhill Cranes, and I'd really like to see those. So we thought that was a little bit unique. And the other thing we're trying to do today, and you've noticed maybe, I don't know how you could not, our little fascinators that we're wearing to put you in the southern feel, and we're trying to show you Nebraska hospitality, Southern style. And so when you get seated, there will be board members assigned to answer your questions and greet you and so on, and we'll be doing a live auction of the centerpieces at the end today, during dessert. And that's something new for us, and I'll explain more about that later. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Ty Leslie from Charleston, South Carolina.
Morning. Thank you for coming. I wanted you to see the city that I live in. It's probably the most beautiful cities in the world. If you've never been there, please come. It's the city of Southern hospitality. I want to share with you what it's like to live in the South. I hope I sound Southern enough for you. I'm told that I don't sound as Southern as most people think I should, but they think I'm supposed to talk like this, and that's a different area of the South. Entertaining in the South is something that you learn from day one. Your company is always special, and you're entertaining not only guests, but your family itself. My mother is a very peculiar woman, but she is the most gracious lady you will ever meet, and she does not believe that anything comes to the table the way it was packaged in the supermarket. So you do not put a milk carton, an orange juice container, a tub of butter or ketchup or mustard. It's all put in a glass container with its own spoon or knife, and it takes an hour to get ready to make your lunch, and it takes an hour to clean it all up. But it makes it just a wonderful way to be. I grew up thinking that everyone ate with a sugar spoon. I'm an only child, and I spent a lot of time with my grandmothers, and they taught me so much about gardening and how to root flowers, and whatever they did, I did. And therefore, if they were doing embroidery, I had to learn how to embroider. If they were sewing on a button, I learned how to sew on a button. and it comes quite in handy. And this is just a simple little arrangement that shows that you don't need a lot of flowers and you can make anything special. And this is Queen Anne's lace. It's a hybrid, and Queen Anne's lace is part of the carrot family. And the root is edible if you would like. And you can tell that this is our thistle. I love thistle. It's part of our Scottish heritage. Charleston was founded in the 1600s as a free colony, which meant that you could practice any form of religion that you wanted to come there. That's how desperate they were to have people come to the New World. And so we had French Huguenots who were the persecuted French. We had a huge congregation of Jews. We have the second oldest synagogue in continual use in the country. George Washington even visited there. Not the particular building that's there now. Charleston is known as the Holy City. When you approach the city from the water, all you see are the treetops and the church steeples, and that makes it very special. We have some rosemary. Rosemary for fragrance, and as we know from Shakespeare, rosemary for remembrance. And one of my grandmothers always taught me, and you'll hear me refer to a grandmother and a big mama. Big mama was my maternal grandmother, and Big mama was about 4'5" and weighed maybe 80 pounds. She was trying to explain to the first grandchild that she was the big mama and her daughter was the little mama, and all the grandchild picked up was Big Mama. And Big Mama may have been tiny, but she was big. And you did what she said. And this is freesia. Freesia is incredibly fragrant. And this is a lovely little flower. It's Cresspedia globosa. It's also called billy balls. And I love this little vintage wire holder. It travels well. And you don't have to think when you're doing things like this. I actually did a wedding reception for a couple, and they loved all their time at the lake, and beer was their favorite thing. And we did this very similar look on green linens with all their favorite beer bottles that had the labels removed. And I was impressed. I told them that they would have to drink all the beer and remove all the labels. And they did it all in 2 weekends. They had help from their friends. But when we were telling people about the reception, we were going to use beer bottles, and they were like, "Are you sure? That sounds just really crazy." And everybody that saw it said, "This is the most beautiful reception we've ever seen," and we had no idea beer bottles could be so pretty. Now, I'm adding a couple butterflies to this because my grandmother, when she taught me to arrange flowers, she said, "You always have to leave room for the butterflies to fly through." And so we're going to have some butterflies in her honor. She'll be 94 in June. And I'll answer the 3 questions that I get asked the most right now. Yes, my hair is naturally curly. 2, yes, I know that people pay a lot of money to get curly hair. And 3, I'll be 53 in June. So now that that's done, there should be no more questions. So it doesn't take a lot. This could be perfect for a breakfast, a brunch, outdoors. This is a sweet little piece of silver. It's a new piece added to my collection. A friend of mine bought it and saw it and said, "I knew you had to have it." This would sit in your entry hall, and before the days of cell phones, people didn't come over by calling on the telephone. You had a calling card. And when you would go to someone's home, you would leave your card if you wanted the person that you were visiting to come visit you, and you would leave your card in the calling card receptacle. But after the Civil War, there was not a lot of money left to purchase cards. So if you needed to have your card back, you bent the corner of your card down, you left it there. The servant would then write down the names of everyone who left cards, and your card would be left at the door for you to pick up as you left so that you'd be able to have your cards to continue going because you did not go without a calling card. We're going to use this little arrangement this little pedestal as our arrangement. And a friend of mine from Florida, Eleanor Clevenger, she works for the David Austin Rose Company, and she sent us some beautiful English garden roses. She's always said, if you ever need flowers, just let me know. And so I called her and said, I'm going to Nebraska. I met these really sweet people. And would you mind? And she said, sure, what day? And she sent the flowers for us. And so I'll be using lots of beautiful roses. These are called Juliet. And, you know, one of the things that I think that we miss in today's world is we don't listen. Everybody is talking on a cell phone. They're sending text. They're emailing. They're twittering and everything else they shouldn't be doing. And we need to just sit down and have conversation. And my big mama was the youngest of 13 children. So she had aunts and uncles who were just a few years older than her. And her brothers and sisters seemed ancient to me. So ancient that by the time I had to have bifocals, I cried because I thought that meant I was old. Because I remembered the big bifocals as the lines across the front, and now we have progressives, so that makes it better. But being dragged along to these different relatives' homes, I heard all these stories of growing up and what life was like and how it used to be. And it makes me appreciate more and more, but so much of what I learned was, if you've watched the series Victoria on PBS, PBS is a wonderful provider of programming for us, and we learned that my grandparents, my grandmothers, are the last of the people who would have been exposed to Victorian culture. And many of the things that I do as a Southerner and have learned are because of their being exposed to that Victorian culture. And it's something that's lost. My godson loves fine dining, but he loves his cell phone and iPhone so much better. And if I were to ask him to name the British royals, he could name maybe Prince William, probably Kate, definitely. But knowing where our customs and traditions come from are part of that. My big mama, every time you would visit her, when you would go to leave, she would always say, remember who you are and where you came from. And then she would say, now give me a hug and a kiss. We don't know when we'll see each other again. And for the longest, I thought she had some fatal disease and was going to die by the end of the week. And I never quite understood, remember who you are and where you came from. And for me, today, remembering who I am and where I came from is really much how I now earn my living, because I share where I came from and who I am with you as a Southerner. The South is a beautiful place. I hope you all come visit. This is Jasmine Vine. And we have a little saying in the South, and it goes like this: if it's worth doing, it's worth overdoing. Also, which translates into more is not enough. I am not one of those designers who believes that less is more. Less is just less because you didn't want to go to the trouble to do it. My grandmother is a firm believer that everything had to be homemade. And so you don't bake a cake with a mix. You don't make cornbread with a box. You would never serve a frozen dinner. And you would never pass off food you purchased at home at the store as your own, to the point that she pretty much ruined our Christmas dinner this year because she refused to eat the coconut cake that my aunt purchased, which was an amazing cake, and she wouldn't eat my dressing because it was too brown. I'd put too much sage in it. And this is all a collection of some of my little favorite pieces of silver. This little cup I'm using right now is a Russian sterling cup that would have been given as an award. It has some, if you speak Russian, come please interpret for me. But I love collections. Collections say so much about who you are, what you like, your interest. And taking these sterling baby cups, chocolate pots, the little apron for the calling cards. And as you can see, it doesn't take a lot of time because the containers actually become the most important element. We're using color to bring it out, but just a few of these wonderful garden roses, and using red and pink together. That's something that we wouldn't have done a long time ago. But as colors change, as the makeup of our country changes and the colors, all of that comes into play. And it just makes a really romantic feel for everybody. And to me, flowers should always be soft and romantic and pretty. Even if I'm doing contemporary design, which shocks people that I know how to do something modern. And I do know how to use a microwave. Takes me a while to figure it out. Just don't ask me to use a copy machine. And then the one thing that we need to do to finish it off is a few petals. My favorite flowers are peonies and tulips. When they are just about to expire, and when you look at them, you know that if you were to sneeze, all those petals would fall off. And so I love the romance of the petals to make all this happen. And it's not a lot of flowers, but it looks like a lot because it's spread out in small containers. So you can take something as simple as just a little cordial, but when you group them all together, you have something beautiful on a silver tray. The linens came from a friend of mine in Nashville, Tennessee. Jo Dermott and I have known each other forever. She has a company called Graceful Tables. The most important thing you can ever have is a good linen, and the linen sets the stage and is the backdrop for your party. When I do events, the first thing we do is select a linen, because the linen, if you're wanting to pull a room together, the color that linen provides, it's the one element that brings it all together to make it happen. And I very seldom get to go to weddings or parties where I am a guest. And I went to one a couple weeks ago, and it was so nice to be there. And one of my friends who was beside me, she said, "What would you change about this party?" And I said, "I wouldn't change anything. It's not mine. I'm not in charge of it." And she said, "But is there something you would change?" And I said, "The one thing I would change is I would change the wedding cake table." And she said, "Why?" I said, "Because they paid one of the most amazing cake designers in Charleston to create a cake for them. And the cake is sitting on a table, and I can see aluminum legs. And that's the one thing that I would change." This is a sweetgrass basket, and you saw the ladies in the pictures weaving the baskets. The baskets are woven by African American ladies. This is a tradition that's been handed down for years. They can trace the weaving of these baskets back to Africa, and these baskets are still woven in the same manner from the exact same materials that they would have been woven 300 years before now. And when their ancestors were brought to the United States in slavery, they brought that technique with them, and as well as the use of okra, and the influence that they have on our culture in the South is amazing. These are variegated fatsia foliage. Charleston is a subtropical region, so we have a lot of, it confuses people. Our winter fall plantings are snapdragon, stock, kale, and rhubarb. That will make your garden grow so beautifully. This is lily grass, which is basically liriope. And I sat in my room last night trying to find something to watch and weave grass. Sounds exciting, doesn't it? I left the party. Who all was here last night for the party? Okay, if you come next year, you've got to come to the preview party because it was absolutely amazing. We had wonderful music and great food, and the luncheon will be so much fun. But the sweetgrass that the baskets are made out of is an endangered species, and so the basket weavers are allowed to harvest the grass. They have to have a permit, and they harvest the grasses, and they have to harvest everything at once that they'll use for the entire year, and then they can soften it and make it pliable by soaking it in water. And this is aspidistra. It's also called cast iron plant. And this is something the Victorians would have grown because it's virtually indestructible. It will grow in low light or almost no light, medium light, under trees. And you can turn the leaves onto themselves to make ribbons out of them. And I have a client that every year we make a fresh arrangement of aspidistra doing just this, of leaves and curls, and it dries and turns the most beautiful shade of brown, and then we start over the next year and keep replacing it. Many of my clients have actually become friends, and there's that wonderful blurred line of friendship and clients, privilege and knowledge. And one of my wonderful clients from when I lived in Atlanta now has a place in Charleston, and her decorator came over the day that I was there to help her plan the Christmas decorations for the house. And she said, "I'm glad you're here because the decorator's bringing over some artwork and I'd like a second opinion." And she brought in all the art, and I was looking at it, and I went, her husband's not going to like this. And finally she turned to me and she said, "But what do you think?" I said, "Well, you know, I'm just not so sure that Bart would like this." Oops, I didn't say that, did I? I said, "I'm not so sure he would like it, and since he has to pay for it, you know, we might consider him as well." And I said, "But you know," I said, "so many other houses already have these birds. Why don't we do something different?" And the decorator was about to kill me because I had just basically probably lost her a $12,000, $15,000 sale in art. And she said, "Well, what about these?" And my friend said, "Oh, I don't really know if I want those." I said, "You have to have those. You have to have those." So literally in about a 2-second period, I went from being the worst person in the world to being the best person in the world because I just sold more art at a higher price. And these are Siloam leaves. And these would actually grow in our garden. When I left home, it was full of, camellias were just still blooming. The dogwoods are in that immature stage where they're that bright green, creating foliages. And I will tell you, if you notice the way I'm designing, I design with one material at a time and move on. I probably have some kind of mental disability because I eat the same way. I eat one food at a time. I start with my least favorite and end with my favorite. And when I design, I usually start with one flower and move on. And I typically start with the largest flowers and work down to the smallest flowers. My best friend in Atlanta is a designer, and he and I can never work in the same room together because he puts one of this and one of this and one of that, and it drives me crazy, and it drives him crazy that I put all of one thing in and all of another in. But you put us back together after we've given the same flowers, we'll have made almost the exact same arrangement. So there's really no right or wrong way to do that. These are gorgeous pink hydrangea, also called hortensia. This is called green trick. It's a lovely green flower that is in the carnation family. It's a hybrid. And it's all about texture. For me, design is more color and texture than anything else. You want something rough next to smooth, shiny next to dull, prickly next to soft. And for our shiny, we're going to use apples. I love to use produce. It throws people a lot of times when I go to the market and buy, because I may buy all vegetables in shades of purples and lavenders. And I bought everything in purple and lavender one day, and as I was walking through, the cashier said, "That's going to be the ugliest meal I've ever seen." And I said, "But it's going to be the prettiest flower arrangement you've never seen." And she said, "You're going to put these in a flower arrangement?" I said, "Of course." When you're working with fruits and vegetables, the weight of the element is very heavy. And so I just buy the bamboo skewers, and you insert 3 into the fruit or the vegetable to anchor it in. And I don't design in a traditional symmetrical way. Our eye has been conditioned to assume that what's on the front is going to be on the back. And one of the first teachers that I had taught me that you want to add an element of surprise. She said sometimes the most interesting thing in the room is the flowers. So you've got to give them something to talk about in case the guests are boring. And so I've always kind of followed her lead. And interestingly enough, when I was working for her, there was a young man who came in and bought flowers all the time and corsages for the dances at Furman University, which, if you've ever seen Furman, we call it the country club. It's one of the most beautiful campuses you'll ever see. And that young man will be here in Nebraska conducting the Boston Pops, Keith Lockhart. So I knew him when he was nothing more than a young college student, buying corsages for the football games and the dances. And that's always a fun thing. So then we'll go back. We'll add our grass weavings for texture and work those underneath. There's lots of depth to the arrangements. They also add movement, keep your eye going through. And we have some beautiful hyacinths. And if you're a fan of PBS, you can't help but love Hyacinth Bucket. It's bouquet. My hyacinths bloomed probably, there it is. I always design with a knife. And when working with hyacinths, because they have such a fat stem that's so soft, if you'll insert a wooden stick or pick into there, you could just toothpick. You can use the hyacinth stake. This will just give them that needed support and allow them to go into the foam. And these will open up beautifully. And pink is a color closely associated with Charleston. The people who Charleston is very much associated with the Bahamas and the West Indies, and we have a street where there's all these colorful houses row on row, and it's called Rainbow Row. And the houses are lavender and pink and pale yellow and green and quite lovely. And they get preservationists love the fact that we keep those colors. Charleston's a city that looks the way it does because after the war there was no money to build new or renovate. Everybody was trying to recover from losses, and it's one of the things that you are amazing to learn when you study history is what were parties like before and parties like after. And we were always amazed when we would hear friends talk about weddings in the North, how big they were, and sit-down dinners and everything. And you eventually learn that that's how weddings were in the South. People had to travel to get there, and they may arrive for a week or two, and there were weeks of parties. And then after people lost everything, people, rather than the ones who kept their money, they changed their ways of entertaining to reflect the new style so that they wouldn't be embarrassing their neighbors that they didn't have what they no longer had. Is that being gracious and everybody recognizing that everybody's in the same boat. It's kind of that too poor to paint and too proud to whitewash comes along. And for just a little more texture, we're going to add in some Brussels sprouts. And Brussels sprouts are my absolute all-time favorite food. I love roasted Brussels sprouts. I cut them in half, nuke them in the microwave for a little bit. Then I toss them in olive oil onto a baking sheet and roast them. And I have to usually buy 2.5 times the amount I want to have because I'll eat half of them when they come right out of the oven. And I'll usually do some caramelized onion and a little bit of turkey bacon and toss it with them. Drizzle some balsamic vinegar. I love to cook, as you can tell, and I think that's why I love to have flowers with my food. Monochromatic. And this will come over here. Oh, we need to add one more thing, our palmetto roses. Palmetto roses are made, the state tree in South Carolina is the palmetto, and you may have become more familiar with the palmetto tree because of the shooting that we had at Emmanuel AME Church. And one of the graphic designs was the palmetto tree with the doves flying out to represent the 9 people who were killed at Mother Emanuel. And these palmetto roses are part of Carolina tradition. They're woven from the fresh new foliage that comes out, and they were given to the soldiers by their girlfriends as they went off to war as a forever rose to remember that they were loved, that someone back home loved them, and to make sure that they came home to them. And now, children sell them on the streets in Charleston, and they have to get a business license from the city, and they can only sell them in designated locations, and they become quite a prized little item to have as a remembrance. Charleston is one of the top destinations in the country for weddings, and we have weddings in Charleston almost every day of the week. People come there for the climate and the fact that their guests can go play golf, they can go to the beach, they can sail, they can shop, and they can eat at any of our wonderful James Beard nominated restaurants and our local restaurants that are all about keeping traditions alive and Southern food culture. So there are roses, and this is going to come over here. Thank you. this will come over to our table where we have a wreath made of the palmetto roses. Everyone in the South has a wreath on their door. They're not left over from Christmas. We actually change them with seasons. This is a lot of times weddings, brides will have these made for the entrance of the church or to the reception, and they keep them as a keepsake. These are some of the sweetgrass baskets. This one's actually made with pine needles. This is a sweetgrass Easter basket that I brought filled with eggs, and a friend of mine is an artist, Thomas Ard, and he does chinoiserie painted Easter eggs, and they're just incredible. I was supposed to get 2 more from him before I flew out, but we had a little problem connecting because he was buying a new house in the process of moving. And these wonderful containers look like birch branches, but they're metal. And they're filled with pussy willow and then just some branches. And if we had some little eggs, we could hang off of there as well. But I love the natural elements of the theme of green. Green is the new Pantone color of the year. I think that we're ready for the winter to be over. We're looking forward to new growth. We're looking forward to a new, better world. And what better color to start that off than the color of green? Oh, I was told to talk about my diet. I had a long list of things to talk about, and I've lost 70 pounds over the course of a year. And everybody's like, how do you do it? How did you do it? And well, I stopped eating white food. And people are like, well, what's white food? And I said, well, foie gras. And then when they realized that's a joke, and said, anything with processed flour, processed sugar. And they're like, but so you can eat chocolate cake? And I'm like, no, chocolate cake starts with white flour and white sugar. Cocoa powder turns it brown. Can't have it. So if you need to lose a pound or 2, just stop eating white food. We had an amazing Greek restaurant that's opened up in town called Stella's. And I was there for brunch the other day after church and having the most amazing vegetarian bowl that I saw the person next to me order. And it came to the table, and I dug in, and I found out that there were Greek potatoes in the bottom of my bowl. And being a Southern boy, you clean your plate. You eat everything that's there, and you smile and say thank you. So I ate my potatoes, and the next day I had gained 1.5 pounds. But it was the best 1.5 pounds you could ever gain. And this is an antique green hydrangea. And we have a hydrangea in my mother's garden called Preziosa. And it's a wonderful hydrangea because when it blooms, almost every bloom on the plant is a slightly different shade or color. And then as it ages, they all start to turn green, and then they all start to age out. As the weather changes, the flowers turn more purple or burgundy, and you end up with maybe 15, 20 different colors of hydrangeas all on one plant, and they dry so beautifully. And you might say, well, why are you using citrus? Those aren't anything to do with Charleston. And we have a county called Orangeburg, and that area was named for the Duke of Orange, who was one of the 8 Lord Proprietors granted by King Charles to found the colony of Carolina. And we have a street downtown called Orange Street, and that was where the citrus orchard was, to provide the downtown people with citrus. And almost every garden in Charleston has some form of citrus. I have at my back door a miniature orange tree that I would have brought some cuttings from to work in the arrangements, but unfortunately, it's been so warm, the oranges were starting to shrivel up and not be quite as pretty as they should be. These are bells of Ireland, We just used our thistle for our Irish family. We'll have to use the bells of Ireland for our Irish family. Now, at the luncheon, you're all going to be so pleased and surprised at how special it is. And you get a recipe. And the recipe is my Big Mama's recipe for pimento cheese. And my favorite way to eat pimento cheese is off of a spoon. But the best way is to make a grilled pimento cheese sandwich, exactly the way you would make a grilled cheese sandwich. Now, the one thing about the recipe is it's the basic starter recipe, and you go from that, and then you get adventurous and add your own flair to it with jalapenos or garlic or bacon or whatever you might like, and make your spin on it, because you can go to every house in the South and they have their recipe for pimento cheese, and it's a sacred private item. It's like the Torah. It's locked up in the Ark of the Covenant, and no one gets to see it. And no one gets the real recipe, but you make it your own. Joe, the wonderful table supplier, tablecloth friend, we were talking about pimento cheese, and she said, "Now, do you put sugar in yours?" And I said, "I haven't, but I've tasted it with it, and I do like it." And she was saying, "Well, my husband's family's from Virginia, and his mother always put a pinch of sugar in hers. And if you're not going to follow my white diet, you can do that." When you're using fresh fruit, I love to use the citrus because they hold up better for a longer period of time, but they tend to dry out, so just give them a nice spray with Pam cooking spray, or brush them with olive oil, or you could put fruit fresh on them, and that will help keep them shiny and glossy. And this pale peach color has been part of our wedding season. Everybody has been all about blush and champagne and beige and cream and ivory. One of the tables in the tablescape has all the quotes from Steel Magnolias. And that's probably my all-time favorite movie. And people who aren't from the South don't believe that that's real. And I said, "Of course it's real." And they said, "You don't know anybody like that." And I said, "I grew up with every one of those women." I said, "I grew up with every one of those women. Aunt Fern is my Aunt Mildred. She's the one who baked the armadillo cake, but she didn't do reptiles because she didn't have counter space." And my favorite quote is from Annelle, and she's told she's got to do the mother of the bride's hair, and she says, "Does your dress have to go over your head?" And she says, "No," and she says, "Oh, good, my work tends to get poofy when I'm nervous." And which I can identify with that, because if I get nervous, my work gets bigger and more poofy. So rather than keep a tight bob. Tulips are one of my absolute favorite flowers. And tulips are phototropic, which means they grow to the light. They also continue to grow after they're cut. And you see them and they start to bend and twist and curve, and that bothers so many people. And people want to know, how do you keep that tulip from doing that? And I said, well, here's the simple way. If you like vodka, pour a glass of vodka. If you like white wine, pour a glass of wine. For every time you cut your tulip and put it in a vase, take a sip. By the time you finish the glass, you don't care if the tulips stand up. And it's the truth. And they're only doing what they're supposed to do, because in the garden, the tulips are growing out of the ground facing the sun, and they're going up to meet their Creator. And when they're in the house, they are looking for the source of light. And that light is a window that's across the room. It's a lamp to the side, so they're just growing to the light. There was a line from a movie, "Come to the light, Carol Ann." That's just what they're doing. And we have these beautiful little spray roses. But before we do that, we'll add some extra fruit. My first exposure to Hy-Vee was in South Dakota. And I can tell you, I don't think I ever saw more beautiful produce in my life. And I fell in love with their pepper display because all the peppers were on little shelves lined up like soldiers. And I thought, I don't have the patience to do that, but that is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And so I got to go have my Hy-Vee experience and grab my vegetables and fruits. And as you notice, I don't really use scissors or clippers when I'm arranging flowers. That's because as you cut through the stem, you are going to crush the ends of the flowers, and they won't take up as much water, so I always use a knife for that reason. And I could never live without bamboo skewers. Or zip ties. When I'm making hand-tied bouquets and bridal bouquets, 9 times out of 10, they're based out with a zip tie to hold them all together. And probably the most confusing thing is I don't tend to turn the arrangements around when I'm designing. And that's because of, as I said, Mrs. Craig, who taught me that so many things about design. She was the one who taught me about people expect what's on the front to be on the back, but she said you're wasting time if you turn it around to look at it, and time is money, and you should be able to see in your mind what's happening in the front. And if you get really worried about it, just have another sip of that tulip vodka, and it'll all be good. In the South, church is a big part of our life, and the little church that I attend is the oldest free church in the country. And that means that it was the first church that you could attend and you didn't have to pay and purchase a pew to sit or rent a pew in order to have a place to sit for the service. And that's a big deal because back then the service was 2 or 3 hours long. And so my little church, St. Stephen's, we're right at 180 years old now, I think it is. First free church, and that's why people say, well, you're in my pew. Well, the pews either had their name or the number, and the more you paid or the more you gave to the church, the closer to the front you were. It's kind of like the higher the hair, the closer to God theory. The more you pay, the better sermon you'll get if you sit closer. But our church has an interesting history. It was started out as a free church, as a mission church, and then depending on the economic times, it would be open or closed. At one point, an African American Methodist congregation rented the space, and when they could no longer afford their own minister, they appealed to the Episcopal Church to help them. And they said, well, we'll do it, but you'll need to convert because it really wouldn't work for us to be supporting Methodist. No offense to any Methodist out there. So they took a vote and they became an Episcopalian church. And they were one of the few African American Episcopalian churches. And then in the 80s, as the neighborhood became more gentrified, it became a mixed congregation, and it's always been on the edge of belief and that everybody is always welcome at God's table. And my grandmother is very worried about my soul and salvation because I'm an Episcopalian and we don't use the King James Bible, and she's worried that I'm not going to get into heaven. And I've assured her on numerous times that heaven is not a place for white middle-class Southern Baptists alone. She's going to be real surprised to find out that there's Lutherans and Catholics there too. And Hypericum berry, which is one of my favorite little accents. And when you layer you can see that by building the layers, you get the texture that you want, and the smaller flowers and smaller foliages come out across and highlight and dance above. I was on the flower committee for a church in Atlanta, and we had a job fair. They thought that it'd be a great idea to get more people interested in the church if people knew the different committees, and being on the flower committee, I had to be there. And this cute little old lady came up. She had a cane and she looked so sweet. And she walked up to me and she said, "What do you do?" And I said, "Oh, I'm part of the flower committee." And she said, "Don't like them." And I said, "Don't like what?" And she said, "Flowers." And I said, "Well, why do you not like the flowers?" She said, "I don't know what's wrong with you all, but y'all use feathers and sticks and fruits and vegetables, and I like flowers, carnations and mums and daisies." And I said, "Well, we can use those if you request them. What we try to do is we're a liturgical-based church, so whatever is being mentioned in the scriptures, we try to incorporate that as sort of a visual reference to what's going on as well." And she said, "I don't care, I want real flowers." And I said, "Well, I'll tell you what, there's two options. You can join the committee, and the Sunday that you're assigned to arrange the flowers, you can do it. Or the Sunday that you decide to pay for the flowers, that's what you can have. But here's the deal. The flowers are there to remind you that God created the trees that gave us the fruits to eat, a place for the birds to live. The feathers remind us that He knows how many feathers that bird has, and that bird gets to eat and doesn't have to plant a garden. It's all taken care of. So God's taking care of you like He's taking care of that bird. You have a nice day." She walked on and she didn't sign up for our committee. And that's part of the joy of what we do, is you get to share what you're doing and what you love. And then I have these beautiful roses here. This rose from David Austin is a great Nebraska rose because it's Beatrice. And that is my grandmother's first name. And I love doing analogous color palette where the flowers are all falling next to each other on the color wheel. If you're not comfortable with color, just go monochromatic. You can't go wrong. It's always going to be beautiful. That's all shades of the same color, but analogous are the colors that fall along the way. I love the look of like the old-fashioned Cherokee garden rose. It's just a single row of petals. And the way I achieve that look is I take a modern hybrid rose and I reach in and, please behave, slowly pull out the center, and you get just that part. Because I remember roses like that growing by my grandmother's back door. while other kids were riding bicycles, I was learning how to graft roses and camellias. And I think I got the better end of the stick. Now I'm going to cheat and turn this around just a little bit, because I knew I had some holes from the grapefruit. And this citrus fragrance adds so much to the design. And in Charleston, we have an area called Noisette, and that's for where the roses are originated, the Noisette roses. And cemeteries are one of my favorite places to go because you can tell so much about an area by their cemeteries. And years ago, I gave a program on the symbolism of flowers and foliage as used in Victorian funereal art. And people said, "Lord, that sounds morbid." And it was one of the most interesting research projects that I ever did. And I learned that if there was a pair of small shoes, it meant that there was a child that had died there. If there was only a rose bud that wasn't opened, it meant that it was a young lady who had probably passed away. If there was ivy or some foliage on the tombstone, if there was just a little bit of ivy growing up, it meant they had a short life. If it was covered in ivy, it meant that they had a long, full life. If there were sunflowers, they were primarily Catholic because sunflowers follow the sun and they're considered the eye of God. You almost always only found references to the bread and wine in Catholic funereal art. And you always saw the urns with the flame on the top being the eternal flame. If you come to Charleston and go to Magnolia Cemetery, you'll find this big, huge stone pyramid, and it was not used to store grain. It was used to store bodies. Sadly, the bodies were stolen and disappeared, but on the doorways, the torches that would be used to light your path in are upside down, which means the flame has extinguished and life has ended. So there's all sorts of incredible symbolism there as well. And I'll turn this around for you. And we have this great linen as well. And I feel that the container is one of the most important elements of a flower arrangement. The linens that you're going to use are important. The color is incredible. But just remember, it's just flowers. If you didn't get it right that day, you're the only one who's going to know because people love flowers so much. Don't stress about it. There's so much to worry about in this world today. Don't worry that the flowers weren't the right shade, that they weren't in the right place. You've got next week to do it. It's quite all right. I was setting up flowers in a church one weekend for a service, and the flower lady comes down and she says, "Your flowers are too tall." And I said, "Do what?" She said, "That branch is about a half-inch too tall." And I said, "I'm sorry." And she said, "Flowers cannot be taller than the arms of the cross." And I said, "Really?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Why is that?" She said, "Because the cross is the most important element of the service." I said, "Gee, I hope your God's not mine, because there's bigger problems in the world than a branch in a flower arrangement." And she looked at me really scary, and she said, "That wasn't nice." And I said, "I think it's true." I said, "With everything that's going on in this world today, I don't think a flower being an inch high is too much to worry about." She later came around the next week and said, "Those really were pretty. I think we're going to start doing what you said." So it works sometimes. Thank you all for being here. We've got a couple things to do. Underneath your chair is something like this. And if you have one of these under your chair, you get to take one of my flower arrangements home. Are we finding them? Okay, I'm going to call out the numbers. I've been given the secret code. If you're in F12, H26, or L9. And the flowers will be up here for you to take after the luncheon. I want to say it's been such a pleasure to be here. I hope you have enjoyed flowers. I hope you come visit me in Charleston. I hope you look for graceful tables. You look for Thomas Ard. You look for Lisa Ferguson online for the palmetto roses, Thomas for the eggs. Thank you so much to Karen and Julie for putting up with me and inviting me to come here. And we're going to have a big reveal. And you're going to see something that's incredible, and we're going to have a little ray of sunshine to start off our spring so well. Thank you. There we go. They've worked hard on this. So y'all come on down for dinner. And everybody's going to go this way so that you can come around the stage and enter on that side, and your tables are numbered. And just make sure you go to your table.